about, I'm kind of making these numbers up, but roughly 15,000 northern, 5,000 southern, 80% of them died within 3 months. They were cared for by the people in Gettysburg, and they died. So, you know, it's hard. We haven't lived in a world, even Second World War didn't have those kind of casualty rates that the Civil War had, although there were some pretty bloody places, as you all well know. So, this is how things sat for day 3, July 3rd, that we're going into. They had held the line, the fish hook had held, they moved back up from the peach orchard. The interesting thing was that new troops were coming in regularly for both sides. Pickett only arrived early or late in the evening the second day. He was 20 miles out of town. There were troops coming in. They withdrew all of the troops who had battled for 2 days in these areas here and brought them into this area and then replenished them with fresh troops. Lee didn't know any of that was happening. The next day he was going to be facing new troops because, again, his cavalry only showed up late, very late of the end of the second day. And they'd come around, way around, they didn't know any. Jeff Stewart had no idea what was going on over here. Less idea than Lee had. So they were really completely in the dark. But that's a significant point. Lee assumed that they did not have reinforcements. And that these people here had been badly mauled. He knew that. These people here had been badly mauled. So he assumed that what they would do is they would weaken their center to get their flanks because it would make sense to attack the flanks. So that's why he came up with a plan for the third day of what becomes known as Pickett's charge to come across the center. What he didn't know was these were all fresh troops, and here, in reserve, were all the troops that had been here and here. And what was going to be happening at that point in time. The other important situation is from his vantage point all along this area here, where he was stationed for whatever he could. You couldn't see that from the tree line, which runs about here, to the Emmitsburg Road, the topography goes like this. It dips down. And if you're standing on this side, it just looks like it's a parallel plane, but it isn't. It's a dip. And the dip comes out right before the Emmitsburg Road and the split rail fences. Contemporary tests have taken sections of those split rail fences and battered them with 40 fully outfitted Civil War reenactors. And 5 minutes of battering against it, they couldn't knock them down. So the only thing they could do was climb over them. Now you think about it. You've got a big long rifle, you've got a heavy pack, you've got several hundred rounds of cartridges and everything like that, in heavy woolen suits on July 3rd, 1863, in the middle of the heat. You got to put all that stuff down, you got to climb over that fence, you got to reach over and get it all back. Guess what you are? A sitting duck. Exactly right. And this is where the vast majority of the casualties were in these areas around this particular fence, that place. This is Devil's Den. There's one of the rifles that were more typical used. This is the place, that's to the mountaintops in that direction. This picture was taken a few days after the battle, not by Matthew Brady, who took all the credit for doing it. He didn't, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman. The body of this Confederate sniper was still there a week or so after the battle hadn't been moved. But this is where they were sitting, they were picking people off in this. This is Devil's Den. Devil's Den would be here, so to speak, then what's called the Valley of Death and the Round Top. When my daughter and I walked the battlefield about 6-7 years ago when she was doing doctoral training or work for a doctoral dissertation, I said to her, "We're going for dinner tonight down at the restaurant where the Southern generals bivouacked, and they had eaten in that restaurant. It was there. It was a tavern, still there to this day. There's graffiti on the walls. Pickett's got his name where he scratched it in the wall, all this kind of stuff. Interesting place." And I said, "Then we're going to do something, be prepared." She said, "Dad, I've known you all my life. I figured you're going to do something weird." So we parked right by Devil's Den, and at night we walked across the Valley of Death, up Little Round Top to the position that Chamberlain held. I have to tell you, hair in the back of my neck stood up. And without any doubt, hallowed ground. A holy place where many, many Americans, both from the North and the South, died. It was a very powerful experience. General James Longstreet, he did not like what was happening. He kept telling Lee we should pull out. They've got us where they want us. We don't have them where we want them. They've got the high ground. They've got the better internal lines. We should pull back, find a good spot, and wait because they'll attack us. And Lee just said, I can't do that. The army is there. And, Lee had won virtually every battle he'd ever been in doing things that nobody should have done, getting away with stuff in places like Chancellorsville and things like that you just should never have gotten away with. And his luck just simply ran out. Gettysburg was the last Napoleonic style battle. Massed troops on an open field marching across the field into the fire of the opposition. Now, in 1815, we were firing muskets that between here and the bulletin board back there was, about 45 feet. The bullets are going this far apart because they just bounced down the barrel. And you didn't have the velocity. But now we're dealing with rifled muskets and rifled material and 7-pound and 5-pound cannons shooting grape shot and things like this, and canister shot. It was a butchery. Walking through that was just horrible. Lee figured that out after the Battle of Gettysburg. We'll talk a little bit about the consequences afterwards. Never again did he use those tactics. He invented jungle warfare at the Wilderness. He invented World War I style siege tactics at Petersburg. He used all of those kinds of things. The simple matter of fact was the South never had a chance after the losses of Gettysburg and Vicksburg to replace the attrition that the North could do. Longstreet also died in 1904 of old age. He became a Republican senator from one of the southern states after the Reconstruction, and many of the southern people had a lot of antagonism towards him because they had dared to criticize the beloved General Lee, plus he'd become a Republican and worked for the scallywags, and that's a technical term at that period of time. At the last gathering of the Southern Army that he was able to attend at any rate, which happened for him in the late 1890s, he showed up in his full 4-star Confederate uniform, walked in, head held high. People kind of looked at him. There was a moment of silence, and then finally one of his troops stood up, and they began to applaud. And he had a moment of reconciliation close to the end of his life. Here's a better look at what's going on. Ewell's up here with 15,000 men. Here's the Union Center with 5,500 men in reserve, a total of 85,000 men in this little area. Lee with roughly, 13,500 with Longstreet, Pettigrew, there's 7,000, another, so there's 13, so about 26,000, 27,000 versus 85,000. That were the odds. That had been the odds through the whole Civil War, and Lee had won every darn time, simply because he out-generaled them. There was a series of generals for the North who were just plain incompetent. And it wasn't until Ulysses S. Grant took over after Gettysburg where Lee finally had somebody who said, I can point him in the direction of the enemy and say, go, and he would go. And somebody would say, but he's a drunken bum. I don't care if he staggers, he got there. And that made all the difference in the world. By the third day, these areas were now filled with artillery. Both Little and Big Round Top were filled with artillery. All of this area was filled with artillery. And this whole open area was about a mile from here to here, open fields. They tried to bombard this Union Center, assuming that this was going to be weak, not realizing how well, as I say, manned it was. 350 guns in this area alone. And it took, they had, again, if we go off the board, you see, they had the carriages for the guns, for the powder and shot for the southern guns were way back here, 2 or 3 miles back, because they had to be. They would bring them up in small amounts and start, they just could not keep up enough fire.